Good morning. Always glad to have Joe diGenova here, legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney to the District of Columbia. Joe, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Hey, I want to begin with the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. He was on the Sunday shows this weekend on CNN's State of the Union and had the following claptrap to say about an informant being tied to the Trump campaign.
Well, I think the first thing is determine just what was going on. If there wasn't a concern about the Russians, and that could be allayed, then perhaps no reason to do that. The FBI has rules and protocols when they decide to do things like that, and I don't think at that point that it reached the point where it would be appropriate to engage, with the head of the campaign or the nominee.
In other words, it's fine to spy on the campaign, not fine to tell Trump about it. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that Mr. Clapper suffers remarkably from a lack of candor, to put it mildly. And it's pretty clear that Clapper and Brennan started the entire counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign without any legal basis whatsoever, even in the flimsy world of counterintelligence. And I think that Clapper's blathering and his inability to articulate anything shows he now knows that they're in a world of hurt, which is why over the weekend the Democrats abandoned the spy versus informant discussion, because they know they've lost that discussion, and now it's throw the bums out. It's from crumbs to bums is where the Democrats are now.
Joe, this may be a really naive question here, but if they had someone who wasn't spying on the campaign, they were spying on the Russians and just happened to get some information on some of the people in Trump's orbit, they already know if there's collusion because they had someone investigating that during the campaign, right?
Well, yes. But let's not get lost in the weeds of spy versus informant. This was activity. That is, the use of counterintelligence authority by the FBI upon the insistence of John Brennan to infiltrate, spy upon, inform on the Trump campaign was a violation of all legal norms known at that time. It was never done in the history of this country, what happened in 2016. People have to understand that. Don't get into the weeds on this. Just look at the broad picture. Remember what they did. The head of the CIA convinced the FBI director to begin a counterintelligence investigation against the campaign of the sitting president's opponents. This is unbelievable. And the reason the Democrats don't want to talk about it now is because after that briefing by the Department of Justice to the Gang of Eight and Nunes and Gowdy the other day, you'll notice the only person to go out and say anything was Adam Schiff. And he said, nothing that we've learned has changed our mind that there wasn't spying on the Trump campaign. He read a written statement. He didn't take any questions, and then he shut up for the rest of the weekend, except to say, we're not going to deal with this anymore. It's time to throw the bums out. Now, what do you think happened in that briefing? I'll tell you what happened. They found out that the basis didn't exist for a counterintelligence investigation. This is the beginning of the end.
But my point with the question is that we don't need a Mueller investigation because they already know whether there was or wasn't collusion based on the information they got from their informant or spy, whatever you want to call that person.
Yes, if they were conducting legitimate operations, you would, of course, get that answer. But this was not a legitimate counterintelligence operation. The idea was to plant information in the Trump campaign, get the information blown back into the United States by Papadopoulos and Carter Page, continue the spying to see if they could find out anything. Remember, there was no legal basis for the spying. And remember, Rod Rosenstein, our Deputy Attorney General, the man who, for no reason, created a special counsel where legally there was no basis for creating one. When you look at the origins of the Mueller investigation, you see that it was illegal. And even if it isn't sufficient to get charges dropped, it is certainly sufficient for the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to tell Mr. Mueller to go pound sand.
I wonder as I hear about all of this spying on the Trump campaign, the extent to which President Obama knew about it. Because, obviously this seems so exceptional, and Joe placed it in a frame for us. It seems so exceptional that you would think that you would notify the President of the United States that the opposing presidential candidate's campaign was being spied on by the government.
Well, of course the President knew about it, President Obama, because as you will recall, Susan Rice told us in a memo to herself on Inauguration Day 2017 that there had been a meeting on January 5th in the Oval Office with President Obama, Biden, Comey, herself, and others about all of this investigating that was going on, and the president just wanted to make sure everybody knew that everything was done by the book. The President of the United States was holding that meeting, Barack Obama. Of course he knew about the spying. Of course he did. And now the only question is, will he be asked about it? Will he be the first former president called before Congress to give testimony under oath about what he did? He has no immunity now as a former president. He can't be charged, obviously, with anything he did at the time. We're not interested in crimes here. We're interested in knowledge. And it's pretty obvious that Obama knew everything.
Rudy Giuliani, who you mentioned, said over the weekend that he's comfortable with the President of the United States answering questions about collusion. He's not comfortable with him answering questions about obstruction. He says he's innocent, but it's a matter of interpretation and that they could try and catch him here. What do you make of that?
Number one, the president cannot be asked questions about any of that because he did that as President of the United States when he fired Comey and everything in the aftermath of it. So Article 2, he can't be asked questions about why he fired Comey. And executive privilege, he can't be asked about any questions he had with any of his subordinates about any of those matters. Whether or not he wants to answer any questions about the Russian collusion is ridiculous. He's not going to answer any questions about collusion. I can't imagine that in the end they're going to allow the president to sit down with these 13 thugs that Mueller has hired, Democratic apparatchiks. I mean, the notion that Bob Mueller would have allowed himself to hire this many partisan Democrats, including Andrew Weissman and Jen Rhee and all these people who are partisan Democrats who worked for Hillary Clinton, is just mind-boggling to me. Bob Mueller has stayed too long at the fair. He needs to go. And I don't mean he should be fired. I mean he just needs to wrap up and go back wherever he wants to live.
Joe diGenova, thank you. A lot of legal news happening throughout this Trump administration, and you've been all over it. We really appreciate that, sir.
You bet. Thanks, guys.